Welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'm talking about the usage of tarot in the Harry Potter books, specifically around Professor Trelawney. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/everydaytarot. I just added some new benefits over there, so go ahead and check it out. The link is in the show notes. If you need to find it, you can always go to my website at camilleasaunders.com/everydaytarot for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards I pull. And if you're local to the greater Puget Sound area, I'd love to see you at one of my Let's Talk Tarot meetup group events where we bring some of our favorite decks and play around with tarot and oracle decks together. I just had a meetup last night and it was wonderful. We all got to read for each other and that was super fun. Our next meetup will be on April 6th. So you can use the meetup link to check out details on that event. All right, so into our main discussion. So we're getting close to the end of season 4 of the podcast. In season 1, I introduced tarot through talking about tarot basics. In seasons 2 and 3, I went through the major arcana cards and the 4 suits, one per episode. And this season, I'm talking all about tarot and pop culture. And today, I thought I would get into the usage of tarot in the Harry Potter books, part 2. So if you listened to last episode, I sort of got into a little bit of tarot in Harry Potter and how divination shows up. There's not actually a lot of tarot in it, although I did find some other references where there are specific cards talked about that I didn't get into last episode. And I just sort of wanted to generally talk about Professor Trelawney, who's the divination teacher at Hogwarts, the school. And I will get into Harry Potter spoilers in this episode. So if you haven't read through the end of book 6, you should do so before listening to this, or if you watch the movies, that'll work too. But yeah, so in last episode, I talked about that there's this moment in book 6 in the Half-Blood Prince where Professor Trelawney, she's sort of in the corridor, and so is Harry. I think Harry is under his invisibility cloak, so she doesn't know he's there. And she sort of appears around a corner, she's muttering to herself, and she shuffled a pack of dirty-looking playing cards, reading them as she walked. So the cards that are depicted that she talks about are the 2 of spades, the 7 of spades, the 10 of spades, and the knave of spades. And then she later goes on to talk about the tower card. And I did talk about the tower card last episode, so I'm not going to get into that a whole lot. But so seemingly she's reading from like a traditional card deck. And then I think there's like even this moment where like with the tower, she talks about that she actually seemingly like goes back to her office, or like she says she keeps getting the same cards and she's very confused. And so she sort of like, we get another instance of her where she comes in and she's like, okay, like seemingly she switched from like a traditional card deck to tarot cards to like see if she's missing something. So in this one, she is reading the traditional like card deck, which can be read like tarot. And so in this instance, spades would be equal to swords. So basically she pulled like 4 swords cards all at once. And so I was doing some kind of research and looking at stuff online about kind of what people think these are about. And yeah, so swords represent spades. So again, she pulls the 2 of spades, the 7 of spades, the 10 of spades, and the knave of spades. And she sort of has like a brief summary of each one. She says the 2 of spades, conflict, she murmured as she passed the place where Harry was crouched and hidden. 7 of spades, an ill omen. 10 of spades, violence. And the knave of spades, and then she says, a dark man, possibly troubled, one who dislikes the questioner. And she sort of stops right in that moment. And she sort of, again, she's muttering to herself, so it doesn't seem like she really thinks anyone can hear her. She stops and Harry is like just on the other side of the statue. And then she's like, oh, okay, that can't be right. And she sort of annoyed, she reshuffles her cards, and then she kind of moves off again. And Harry gets this whiff of cooking sherry behind her. So again, like in this scenario, or in the books, it is depicted that Professor Trelawney is the divination teacher, and tarot is a type of divination, although there are lots of other ones that are portrayed in the books. And we don't really see the students learn tarot, although I think there's a reference to the curriculum that if they had stayed in it, they would have done tarot reading later on in the later years of school. But Harry doesn't really like the class. Doesn't really like her either, because she's always predicting people's deaths. So she sort of has this reputation of like, she's like trying to make all these like guesses, or she's trying to read the future, but not very accurate. And everyone just kind of like chalks it up to that. That she's like, again, the cooking sherry. So she's like an alcoholic is sort of how it's portrayed in the storyline. And she's muttering to herself, and she's always just kind of doing different things that really the students like don't like her a lot. There's a couple students that do like her classes. I think Lavender and Parvati and the Gryffindors talk about liking her classes, and they, I think, go on to take more of the classes later on. But Harry, our main character, really is not a fan, and she's always sort of focusing on Harry as the chosen one, and that all these great things are meant for him, and she's pretty much always predicting like something terrible is going to happen to him, which is interesting because a lot of bad things do happen to Harry. And so there is this sort of like through line in the books of like, oh, everyone sort of in the books like makes fun of Trelawney or says she's like not real, or like, oh, she's such a fraud. But then we sort of have evidence that she made two prophecies that seemingly did come true, or at least people followed through on the actions of them. And later on, that yeah, that like seemingly like a lot of the predictions she does make, although like belittled in the moment, actually turn out to be true. So I wanted to get into some of the cards this time. So the Two of Spades conflict that she talks about. So Two of Spades again would be like the Two of Swords. And I saw some people talk about that in the books, like Draco, another character in Harry's year, is faced with real conflict right now. He's trying to carry out Voldemort's wishes. Draco's not a killer, but to save his family, he must become one. So there is the seemingly like internal conflict that he's going through. How does he, right, serve Voldemort and his family, but then also sort of like hold true to his own values and his own decisions. And if we were to think about the Two of Swords in a tarot deck, I normally think sort of this trying to find like an in-between. It's often depicted as like a person with two swords again, and like in the image I'm looking at, their arms are crossed, the swords are above them, and they have like a blindfold over their eyes. So symbolizes this feeling of like trying to make peace with the in-between, and finding, yeah, of sort of that like, it's not necessarily that you get to make one choice or the other, or that one choice or the other is going to like be perfect, but that there is this uneasiness, this unresolved things. What about the in-between situation is making you anxious about the future? Can you be at peace with not having everything figured out right now? And I think that is a lot of what the early part of the book is about. Like, Draco sort of knows, okay, he has the decision to make, he has this sort of obligation, and he's trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I do that? How do I actually, like, make it happen? But also, Dumbledore sort of calls him out later on when he's talking to Harry, and says, like, if Draco really wanted to kill me, he would have done it already. Sort of that, like, implying that Draco is picking methods of killing him that aren't foolproof, and that he's sort of playing both sides in a way, even though we see Draco is very much depicted as like conflicted or that he's having a rough time. It's not like he's having this like playing both sides is fun for him. Although, because have another character like Snape that is, we see him that he plays both sides seemingly all along, or that he is this sort of double agent and that no one really knows like who his true master is. But Draco seems a little bit more clear cut in that scenario. And so again, like this card is about often like that in between lessons learning. How are you figuring out what's actually important to you? And ultimately, in the end of the book, Draco doesn't kill Dumbledore. He sort of says he's supposed to. He's talking to Dumbledore. Dumbledore again says, like, Draco, if you wanted to kill me, you would have already done it. Because they go on and sort of have this 10-minute conversation. And then Snape comes up, again, spoilers for the sixth book, Snape comes up and Snape does the deed in Draco's place. So Draco ultimately does decide, like, that he can't do it. Like, he doesn't want to do it, or it doesn't feel right, or he's not a killer, whatever those things are. Again, he is a 16-year-old child, and this is quite the burden to put on him. So the other card, the next one, is the Seven of Spades, and Trelawney says an ill omen. So again, this would be like the Seven of Swords. And looking at the image, yeah, it's kind of about like maybe outwitting things or being smart about overcoming obstacles, using your intelligence to bypass what appears fixed or immovable. It's sort of, when I look at it, it seems like the person is sort of sneaking along, like they look like they're kind of on tiptoe, and they're carrying a bunch of swords, but there's also some in the ground. So there is this like aspect of like, okay, they're sneaking out 5 swords. There's still some left. Like, okay, what are we doing? What's happening? So I would say that like it doesn't totally align with the meaning that I get from Trelawney of an ill omen. In the Fearless Tarot book that I'm looking at by Elliot Adam, it talks about for the Seven of Swords, do not give up easily when life sends you setbacks, or do you find a way around them? How have you used your wits to outsmart a situation that looked hopeless? Are you tired of fighting against one life barrier after another? Don't get mad, get smart. The thief depicted on the Seven of Swords is a brilliant tactician. And there's sort of like this military aspect to it where they're sort of waiting for people to be looking over here, and then they're over here doing something else. So there is this sort of like trickery aspect of it. And so if we think about Draco, he has been tasked with this large task of killing Dumbledore. He's been marked with the Death Eater's dark mark, like tattooed on them, that basically like Voldemort can have him at his beck and call as needed, and again is branded as one of the followers. Certainly an ill omen, especially because the dark mark in the books is sort of considered this like, oh, if you see that hovering above a house, you know that you're about to walk into a murder scene. It's something that almost is used like things in the KKK, of like burning crosses, or sort of this like symbol of something that like something's gone down here, and like, guess what, we did it, now you know who it was, and therefore you should comply. There is that aspect of it. And so this whole book, sort of, Draco takes his time and tries to figure out like, how do I get out of this? He's trying to figure out how to comply with the Dark Lord of Voldemort's wishes, and also he's trying to not actually fully commit. He doesn't seemingly want to follow through on this aspect with Dumbledore and killing him, killing the headmaster of the school he's gone to, or killing other people at the school. He's sort of trying to both save his family, which is what Voldemort is sort of holding over his head, but also that and not just entirely have to go on the run away from him. Because Draco's family, being a servant to the Dark Lord or to Voldemort, is expected. That is what is expected of him. And so he is in this place of, like, I don't know, between a rock and a hard place of trying to figure out, like, who is it I want to be? Is this who I want to be? Do I follow these expectations of my family? Or do I find a way to kind of not do what's expected or look like I'm doing what's expected while actually doing something else? The next card that she talks about is the Ten of Spades, which she says violence. Again, like, when I think of the Ten of Swords, it can look like violence. It's like 10 swords in someone's back. Like, that's literally overkill. But also the Ten of Swords is about this aspect of, like, surrender, I would say. Like, again, if someone put 10 swords into your back, seemingly you were running away or you were trying to get out of there, or, and right, like, by going through this act, you would be very much pinned to the ground, and one sword would probably be enough, but there's 10 in the back, so it can be sort of this, like, intense card in that sense. But again, if we think about it sort of in this non-literal way, Draco again is sort of perhaps surrendering to the situation. Okay, I have to follow through on these certain aspects. And he, like, there are other students that almost die as he's trying to kill Dumbledore with the necklace and with the poison that affect two other students. And it's sort of through, like, luck that no one does die except for Dumbledore later on. But again, Draco, that's not actually at the hand of Draco. It's sort of through Draco's actions because he created some things that led to that situation. But it's sort of like there is this aspect of, like, okay, like, I did the thing I needed to do. I got the wardrobe cabinet to open up to another place so that I could get people through, so I can tell Voldemort that I followed through on his orders. And then when I get to the moment of actually killing Dumbledore, it doesn't happen. He doesn't do it. And Snape steps in and does this. And then for the last card that she talks about is the Knave of Spades, and the Knave would be like the Jack of Swords. And this is the one where she says, a dark young man, possibly troubled, one who dislikes the questioner. And she's sort of like, in the book, I think initially as the reader, you're supposed to think, like, oh, it's about Harry, because, like, Harry is standing right there, and he, has dark hair, and he's sort of troubled, and he doesn't like her. But it could also be about, like, when we think about the like the Jack or the Page, or would be about lowering unnecessary defenses. So she's sort of saying, it's this troubled thing, like, again, sort of taking a more literal interpretation of the card, I would say. And yeah, it's interesting because at the end of the book, Dumbledore does, like, offer to Draco that if he doesn't want to kill him, he can, like, Dumbledore will protect him. He can go into hiding with the Order, and that's sort of the path that Draco wants to take, but he knows that Voldemort wants him to hate Dumbledore, and his family wants him to hate Dumbledore and kill him, and, like, he has all this, like, I guess, burden upon him of, like, expectations, and he's worried that Voldemort will kill his family if he doesn't follow through. Like, it's a very large burden for a 16-year-old. Again, Harry sort of has this burden all throughout his schooling, but we really see Draco in this book really also sort of come to this aspect of it. And if we think about the Page of Swords, again, it would be kind of like, it's often like a person. They look sort of almost like carefree. Talks about that it's their sword is guarding the wounded area of the heart that needs healing, right? I think for Draco that would be the part of him that thinks he has to do exactly what his family wants, otherwise they won't love him or they won't want to be with him, or that he has to follow this exact path that they have followed. And perhaps they would disown him, or perhaps they wouldn't. Um, like, there perhaps are consequences that would follow that, but we do see in the last book that his mother ultimately cares more about Draco, her child, and his safety more than she cares about the cause, more than she cares about Voldemort and his plans and what he wants, because she lies to him and protects Harry in the final moments. And so, yeah, I guess thinking about this card, it is interesting because it's like they're guarded, they have this sword that's ready to swing at anyone. You wouldn't, right, necessarily want to get close to them because they have this giant sword and they're ready. They're in this defensive position. But perhaps it's just this like mask for being hurt, right? Or that when they didn't have their sword up before, people took advantage of them. And so we almost have this like other interpretation of it, of like, yeah, Draco is troubled because he doesn't actually want to do the thing that is expected of him, this sort of evil thing of killing his headmaster of his school that he actually, I think, does in some ways respect, even though his family does not, and even though his parents, or at least his dad, is always sort of fighting with Dumbledore and his motives and stuff like that. And that he's really worried about his family and he's carrying this large burden. And so, yeah, to zoom out, we have sort of the, again, aspects of Trelawney, Professor Trelawney, and the cards that she pulls do seem to be related and do seem to be foretelling this future. I've also seen people talk about that these cards could be about the memories that we see about Voldemort in the past, as well, which I think is also interesting. And it's almost that, like, yeah, almost everything Trelawney does say in the books in ways comes true. She does predict students' deaths, which do not seemingly come true, but a lot of the other things that sort of get brushed off or almost as this like red herring of like, oh, she's always wrong, so then we sort of always expect that what she says isn't true. And again, I plan to do a whole season about tarot and divination in the Harry Potter books because I just think this theme of people that have that are into spirituality or have these gifts or are in tune with things or attuned and can maybe read the future often doubt themselves or right are made fun of by others or are considered a fraud because things aren't proven, and that really gets to Trelawney's head and she basically accepts that she's a fraud. Like seemingly she still continues to work with all these methods of divination, but she doesn't really believe it, I don't think, because she does just seem to make sort of wild predictions and then really not value herself or like have a lot of self-esteem. Again, we see like she's consuming a lot of alcohol, and she doesn't seem to have like a lot of friends at the school, and a lot of the other teachers don't respect her. Like she's very isolated, and doesn't have community. And I think that's such an important part of being like this intuitive person that maybe does have these certain gifts or tries to dabble in reading the future, is that if you don't have that community, like it can just feel like you're crazy, especially when perhaps the people around you treat you that way. So yeah, let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today on this topic. So I'm pulled from the Goddess of Love Tarot deck by Gabriella Herstick and Julia Popesco, and I pulled the Ace of Wands reversed. And I was thinking about sort of what's the downside or downfall of when we don't believe in ourselves or trust our own intuition. And it talks about that when this card is reversed, you need to reconnect to the part of yourself that is this powerful part before bringing it outward. It might not be time for the next thing yet, but the seeds are planted, and you can feed them through rituals of devotion, self-love, and self-esteem, that creative energy, that empowering force, awakening to your own powers, and that how can you deepen your connection to your own energetic self to lead you closer and to your values, to your lovers, and to yourself. So it's very interesting, this part of like you need to go inward in order to sort of before you can go outward, I would say. That sort of you need to, again, believe in yourself before you're looking around you for everyone else to validate that, yes, you are a reader, and yes, that people do believe your predictions, and yes, this or that. All right. Thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just as a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. See you soon. Bye-bye.